Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Dan Maloof, Senior Director of Product here at Irons. Excited to be hosting this week's tech briefing. As a quick refresher for any new folks on the line, the purpose of these 30-minute briefings is for our rotating cast of Irons faculty members to dive into the relevant InfoSec news stories of the week and provide you with specific actionable guidance to take back to your teams. With that as a backdrop, I'm thrilled to be joined today by Irons faculty members Dave Shackleford and Jennifer Minella. Dave is the founder and principal consultant with Voodoo Security, an information security consulting firm. And JJ is the founder and principal advisor of Vision Security, offering technical strategy and coaching solutions to CXOs and practitioners. Dave and JJ, thanks so much for joining today.
Always fun. Glad to be here.
With that, let's get started here. All right. Look at the agenda. First topic we're going to discuss is North Korean hackers targeting software developers with malicious NPM packages. After that, we're going to talk about a warning from CISA and the FBI about the RansomHub Ransomware as a service variant. And then finally, we'll discuss the latest on the Mirai botnet and the recent mitigation of the largest DDoS attack ever in terms of sort of resilience overall as a topic. So a lot of ground to cover today. JJ, I'm going to start with you since you did the write-up, if that works. What's going on with this North Korean hackers targeting software developers?
The heck if I know. I don't know. I'm just seeing if Dave's paying attention. So they have this ongoing, contagious interview campaign, really, a hacking campaign they've had going on for a while that combines, social engineering and some other attacks that basically they try to get some malware and then persistence on bots, and they're doing it in a way that targets developers. And I think originally, or the original recent version of that was, crypto wallets, because North Korea is always trying to get the monies and the dollar bills. But more recently, they've also, when they can't get that, or that's not accessible, or that person's not using those, they're coming in and then they're landing and planting, putting remote access into that device, and then using that to pivot around the organization laterally. So not a good look, really.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to comment on that because I think it's pretty funny, sort of the way that you described it. Like they're trying to get that money, but it's like, look, how many enterprise organizations are really hanging out with crypto currency wallets, particularly like browser extensions and things. I mean, I don't know any. I'm not looking at financial institutions that are like, oh yeah, we're just going to do that on the side. I mean, like, so it seems like sort of an odd target. From an enterprise standpoint, it seems like it would be more of a viable sort of attack modality to target like maybe developers that are doing that on their own machines or something like that, and then use that as a pivot point. The second sort of aspect of what you just described, I think that makes a lot more sense, right? Basically planting remote access and then doing other things that seem a heck of a lot more normal in terms of these campaigns to me.
Yeah, and I almost wonder if it was the land and pivot, right, to get into GitHub repositories, OneDrive, and maybe they stumbled on some wallets, because developers, as we've seen, I mean, really a lot of us tend to commingle personal and professional. We might, kind of personally enabled corporate devices where we have a corporate device that's locked down, but we can do certain things on it for our own personal use. And so, yeah, if opportunistic, if nothing else, in this case.
There's a lot more to this one though, right? So I got pretty deep going and digging into this one, because I think on the surface it's like, ho hum, here it is. It's, yet another, North Korean blah blah. And there is a little bit of that, right? I mean, yes, these are very clearly state-sponsored campaigns. First off, I'm just going to, throw out an aside here. Am I the only one who thinks the naming conventions for some of these campaign actors are just getting weirder and sort of more out there, right? Like Moonstone Sleet. Like, what does that even mean, Ricky Bobby? Like, I look at these and I'm like, how are we coming up with these things?
Dave,
yeah.
But Dave, the malicious Python code was called Invisible Ferret.
Right. Like, is it really though? Why a ferret? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I digress. Well, let's not digress that far. But they're getting weirder, and I'm like, it just doesn't seem like there's any rhyme or reason to it. So that's that's an aside for all of our attendees today. But okay, being serious again, there are multiple campaigns here, right? So we don't know if they're the same people. They may be the same human beings with just different names around the campaigns. But some of these campaigns go all the way back into 2023, and some of them are really nasty. I mean, because there's basically one. And I think it was, in fact, the Moonstone Sleet one, right? I mean, basically these packages go out and they fetch either like Python or JavaScript or something. They basically or Python or PowerShell rather, and pull that stuff down and then do things, right? And there's great IOCs published and TTPs that have been published. And I don't think anybody needs us to wax on those because they're published and you can go take a look at them. But they're kind of doing similar things. But this Moonstone Sleet campaign was a heck of a lot more than just that, right? That was like one element of it. But those actors, they had this whole other sort of mojo that they were a part of, where they were posing, creating resumes and posing as technical professionals and actually getting hired by organizations, right? They were creating these entirely fake resumes, CVs, that they were using apparently to get hired as like remote employees. And then they were doing things once hired, leveraging some of this code and doing things internally as well. Like there's a heck of a lot more going on with whatever some of these campaigns are up to. It's not just the, sort of NPM, Git, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot more pieces to the way that they're approaching some of these, these targets and these campaigns, in my opinion. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah. And I think it's why some of the guidance here is really like we keep, I think this week's tech briefing is a great example of we feel like we get needled with these almost redundant, but separate headlines when these things happen. But if you start, I mean, for those of us that are like kind of living and breathing the news almost daily with this, when you watch the thread of continuum between these, you start to kind of see patterns. And then, one of the things that we're saying here is, look, this is not an isolated incident. And it's not just quite a rinse and repeat of what we were dealing with a few months ago. So I think, looking at and putting detection in place for education and awareness, but also then detection in place for things like, did somebody load a remote access application on one of your corporate devices? Because really, you should know that. Regardless of anything else happening, you should know if somebody loaded AnyDesk or remote or GoToMyPC or whatever on one of your corporate systems.
I couldn't agree more. And I think you're right, JJ. There's a lot of sort of core best practices and lessons here. And I look at this as yet another opportunity to sort of take a step back. I mean, sure, we could have a big, long-winded diatribe about insider threat and blah, blah, blah. I think everybody here knows that, and we know why it's hard. But it shouldn't be that hard to detect, to your point, Rust desk, mysteriously showing up on systems. Like, do you use it? Is it a corporate approved tool? Does anybody know? Right? Like, you should know that. You should absolutely know that. You should also, in my opinion here, look, I think there's far too open access to Git. If anybody's got a pretty serious DevOps shop in house, which is probably most of the people on this briefing today, I think we got to know where they're going and what kind of repos we're allowing people to get into. I mean, I know that sounds like a lot of sort of policing, but if people are arbitrarily allowed to just go out and access whatever, Git is not a nice neighborhood in many ways, right? And there's no way to sort of just unequivocally allow access to that without eventually finding yourself with something you didn't want in your house. And it's like, I think that's a good place. I mean, this is a third-party risk discussion. It's an insider threat discussion. It's a core detection discussion. I mean, all of that, in my opinion, steer me if you disagree here, JJ, but I feel like these are fundamentals.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think some of it is harder than others. And I have to call this out. Ryan says a lot of these sound like bad band names, and I have to agree. And Jeff was just talking about in the chat here, covering HR, remote hiring, and I mean we've seen even KnowBe4 came out, just a few weeks ago and talked. I'm sure we covered that here with whoever was doing the coverage that week. But KnowBe4, and when I applaud them for just owning up to that, because I think that's one of those things that could have happened to anybody. And their processes seemed quite strenuous. And they talked about all of the different vetting, background check, references. And it is, I think it is a hard problem to solve, because if somebody is going to go to that length and that extent to trick somebody or trick an organization, they will build an entire, fake universe, right? Like Dave's little Earth world he's got back there shining in his background. Yeah. But it's
Yeah.
hard. And one of the things I told people are like, well, you've got, if you do references, you've got to get, those references on video calls. Well, first of all, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. But second of
No.
all, you're talking about getting references for somebody that's asking for a job. The people that are their references have no obligation besides, in some cases, formally verifying, yes, this person used to work here. And I mean, even just, you guys know, in the security space, for credentials like CISSP that require endorsement from a credential holder, holy cow, one of the reasons I don't do that anymore is because if you've got to go validate somebody's work experience, getting those people to even so much as answer a freaking email is almost impossible. You're probably not going to get them on a video call and repeat that 3 to 5 times like, it just doesn't scale. So there has to be another solution.
Randall.
Yeah. These are hard problems. I think we can all agree. I mean, and I just saw Jeff's comment that came in. I was like, we should cover this in more depth. It should be a separate topic as like, what are best practices around the vetting and around, validation, especially with, deep fakes and things like that. Like, if the entirety of the remote process for interviewing, just makes assumptions that that's the real person, and you don't have any means by which to validate that they are in fact real and don't have 8 fingers or, whatever it is. It's getting weirder out there for sure.
I
But this is just
always
one
wear
facet.
mitts during my interviews.
Well, I would say stay tuned for that. More content to come on that. And I think we have some potential volunteers here to help us with that content. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
But let's keep on moving if we can. I want to talk a little bit about RansomHub. Dave, do you want to give kind of the first what happened here with this new warning or advisory from the CISA and FBI? What's going on with RansomHub?
So there's a lot going on here with this, and I'm going to call out first just the thoroughness of this particular release. I mean, if you really go and dig into this, and I encourage everybody to go do so if you haven't already, CISA and the FBI put out they did a bang up job at this. They listed really explicit IOCs, very, very concise TTPs. They interrelated those to previous campaign observation. I mean, just an awesome collaboration between these agencies, and in JJ's write up, she definitely calls that out. Like, let's share. Like, everybody needs to work together on this deal, and the more we do so, the better these things tend to get, and we all benefit, right? So, I'll call that out first for sure. But if you really go through this thing and take a look, so yes. Obviously, what we're talking about is, essentially it's a known ransomware sort of as a service platform, but it's been affiliated with some of the really big ones, right? So Lockbit, Alfie, they've been tied to this. This is big business that has been going on, and anytime that something this big is out there and it's being actively leveraged by any of these actors, it's most definitely going to attract the attention of federal law enforcement, and not just the U.S., right? This is going to be more so than just us, but we're just the ones that are describing this right now. But if you really dig into some of these things, it's fascinating. They've got a breakdown not only of sort of how they're reaching out. They've got these .onion Tor URLs. Obviously, I mean, this is kind of classic ransom activity, and then they talk about like the variation in terms of timing. It's like 3 to 90 days that they let you respond, and so forth. But here's the thing that stood out to me, and I definitely want to get JJ's take on this, because I dove again in pretty deep on this one just to sort of see what the heck is going on. I mean, it's ransomware, sure. But what really fascinated me was this sort of scope and the range of the different initial access vectors that these actors were taking advantage of in order to get there in the first place. And they're, number one, and this is coming from me as an old network engineer before I became a security person magically. And I know this is something that JJ can certainly resonate with, because she's most definitely an engineer architect at heart. A ton of these were like the Citrixes and the F5s and the Fortinets, right? Like we're really seeing such a massive uptick in these core network platforms that tend to sit at the edge or be exposed at the edge in some form or fashion because they're acting as edge protective mechanisms. And they're getting popped left and right, right? It's net scalers, it's firewalls, it's a bunch of these types of things that are really, and that by no means that's not the extent of it. I mean, we're also seeing Apache, we're seeing Confluence, we're seeing a bunch of other stuff happening there. But that one really just, wow, I didn't realize that's how targeted these very specific things were getting with an entire realm of adversaries that were going on. But the other thing that stood out to me, and again, everybody should go check this out on their own. One of them still harkens back, and this just set off the spidey sense for industrial control environments, OT environments. It was 2017. It's still hitting SMB version 1. This is right now, right? We're still seeing SMB 1 getting hit out in the wild. And, my mind was like just a little bit blown on this thing, but really, really good breakdown of absolutely every facet of how this ransomware is taking effect, what it looks like once it's landed. Tons of stuff to digest there.
Yeah, and I think you were comprehensive there, so I'm not gonna beat that horse. But this is one of those kind of threads of continuum from stories, because when Lockbit and Alpha, I think they wanted to be called Alpha, but just to piss people off, I like to call them Alpha V.
Me too.
So when Lockbit and Alpha V got taken down, all of these people, when you take down a bad guy or even a good guy, whatever they were doing doesn't come to a screeching halt. It's not like, oh, we won, the movie's over, credits roll. That's not what happens. So all of these affiliates who have built up their expertise for infiltrating and exfiltrating and extortion, they're going to look for somebody else. And so there was an organization that had been around, I think, since like 2015, 16, that kind of got reinvigorated and reimagined as this RansomHub group. And so all of the successful affiliates that were attached to the kind of ransomware gangs and platforms that got taken down found a new home. And it's a little disconcerting because, now you almost have, some combined forces, lessons learned, and people that are coming from multiple groups under an umbrella of one, which is good in some ways and terrifying in other ways. I thought it was interesting that, like Dave, you mentioned that they are doing data exfil. That's not part of the RansomHub template you sign up for. You have to figure out how to do that yourself. But these entry points, I think the numbers were over 200 just in the past few months. So over 200 organizations were hit, mostly across critical infrastructure sectors. So, not just limited to, utilities, but healthcare, emergency services, agriculture, manufacturing, blah, blah, blah. But out of those 200, even though there's that breadth of those entry points that you were describing, Dave, there's not so many that it's unmanageable. It's, like a dozen or 10 or so primary entry points, very specific versions of very specific products. It sucks that sometimes they are the Citrix, Fortinet, and I think I saw on that list. And I'm a Fortinet fan, frankly, but I did see, some of the Fortinet OS, which is in their firewall, as well as SSL VPN, and then EMS, which is a platform that is endpoint security. So all of these things, I mean, I think it's, a few things here. Ransomware, when we have a major incident in the news and some takedowns, we can expect there to be a shift, and we need to start adjusting our defenses for whatever that shift might be. I think this advisory that they put out was fantastic. It's the most actionable, detailed information I think I've seen from something like this in recent history, which is why we do encourage you guys to go check that out. And I think it's, if you're in this long list of managing patching and vulnerabilities, at least it lets you focus on probably the 1, 2, or 3 things you have in your environment out of that particular list, but then also, triage that, go back, do a comprehensive and ongoing analysis of everything that's external facing and externally accessible, and start to work through that process in your next set of, priority for patching.
And I'll just add one other thing to this. I mean, because I think everybody gets it, right? I mean, this is just, look, we had to call out the great work that was being done here. But so much of what we just talked about in the first story resonates here as well, because to JJ's point, you know, the attackers had to sort of use their own mechanisms and methodologies and tooling and so forth for a lot of the after action for privilege escalation and lateral movement and data exfil and all those other things. But if you look at this, and again, this is all detailed in the write up here, but it's the same stuff, right? It's AnyDesk. It's they're dropping like classic Cobalt Strike, Metasploit, Mimikatz without even modifying any of this stuff. You know, actually, I'll tell you the one that really stood out to me, which is great. Great, in air quotes there. But one of the executables for the ransomware was sitting in like a temp directory, and the name of it was I am Batman.exe. I'm like, if you can't detect somebody dropping the Batman on your system, bigger problems are afoot here. You know what I mean? Like we probably need to take a step back and talk about EDR and some of the endpoint detection capabilities. Same thing with data exfil, right? They're using putty. Come on, putty. They're using putty. They're sending stuff with WinSCP. Should that thing be on the box? Do you know? If you don't, like, I think we have to ask the broader questions anytime we get this level of detail to say, like, are we good to know if that's sitting anywhere or if it shows up? Because those are the bigger issues at hand, right? It's not so much just the ransomware. Yes, that's the sort of penultimate problem, but we should be picking this stuff up long before it gets to the point where some of these things are actually like transacting. In fact, it's bizarre. Some of the things that the attackers did, I don't want to belabor this too much because I know we got stuff to do, but it tries to stop a bunch of the running processes and things on systems before it starts encrypting, as one would need to. And some of the ones that were listed just blew my mind. Like they try to stop Visio, right? So if somebody's running Visio, they're going to shut it down. And I'm like, is that a target? I mean, I guess I could see it because, maybe you're hijacking people's network diagrams and other things like that. But some of these were really bizarre, and it was just a really kind of interesting breakdown. So, lots to digest there.
And I'll note too that the advisory is in the write-up, so take a look at that when we'll share that along with everyone post briefing. So
as is the information to report to CISA. And I think I'm maybe unpopular opinion here. I'm a huge fan of some type of involvement of CISA when there is an incident. I'm a huge fan of the CIRCIA reporting requirements that are coming down. So the report at CISA.gov, and there's an 800 number there, I think is, they really do have the resources to help and not just be a bump on your road to recovery. And I would definitely leverage that.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, we have about 6 or so minutes left, so I want to get to this last one while we can. JJ, you thought to combine a couple stories here, right? The Mirai botnet latest and one of the largest DDoS attacks ever. Talk a little bit about what the two stories are and kind of what your lessons are from both of them.
Yeah, I think, well, and this is on the heels of application level outages and issues we had, right, between CrowdStrike and Microsoft platforms, which was, it was really kind of cool because the Microsoft thing happened overlapping with the CrowdStrike. So they just kind of pretend like it didn't happen and pointed the finger over there. But they both had their own issues and outages from that. But yeah, last week, so Global Security Layer, which is a company who offers DDoS protection, is my understanding, had what I believe is the largest packet rate distributed denial of service in history. And that seems to have been correlated with several of our tier 1 providers. The particular incident happened over multiple days, kind of peaking at like over 3 billion packets per second, which is kind of crazy. And, that was one incident. They were able to tune their platform as this attack was ramping up. They were able to adjust for it and mitigate it. But it was one attack targeted to one customer that was running a Minecraft gaming service. But within just a couple days of that, Akamai then put out a report saying from their cert that they had found a new Mirai botnet variant. And you guys probably remember Mirai from like 8, 10 years ago, 2016-ish, when it infected all kinds of different things and then just started sort of wreaking havoc and chaos. It got in the hands of some younger people who really didn't know how to wield the power of destroying the internet appropriately. And they took down Brian Krebs' site. They took down Reddit, media outlets like the New York Times, Amazon, all of the big names. So it was pretty impactful. But this new variant coming out is, I hate to say more dangerous, but maybe a little more virulent than the original Mirai botnet was. And so this combination of, the largest distributed denial of service attack combined with now the most prolific botnet for use during denial of service attacks like this, that is spreading on things that are, a lot of the headlines say, unpatchable vulnerability. It's just because they're covering it from the perspective of one of the target devices it was infecting that's no longer in service and not supported. But it's one example of, we have all of these things on the networks. There's a Run Zero article that kind of, like, I think referred to it as like the dark matter of the network, which I love because it's stuff you don't see. And we have this vulnerability. And so there's this vulnerability of somebody attacking an IoT or a device, like a headless device in your network, and coming in and pivoting because, these devices are not as stupid as we think they are. They can route traffic, they can pass packets, they can be used as data exfiltration in addition to an infiltration path. So there's, conversations around, patching, security, segmentation, but then there's this broader ecosystem consideration of, are we being good, corporate citizens on the internet? Because these things that we have in our organizations are being used as an attack against other users, other services out on the internet.
Really an interesting one. Well, I'm just laughing at Ian's comment. There's an appropriate way to destroy the internet. Yeah, the team at the Loft talked about that back in the 90s before Congress. Yeah, so we've been talking about this for a long time. But all kidding aside, I think this is one of those moments where, I mean, number one, look, this is a big deal. How many people have legacy stuff that is basically not getting updated in their environments, and they either know about it or don't, but nobody's going to issue a patch for this, right? Nobody's going to issue an update. And, I really was thinking about this one because I think, okay, hey, look, if I'm working with clients and I'm telling them how to mitigate this, by the way, if anybody hasn't really seen this one, it's a command injection flaw, right? We're talking about like classic old school web injection attacks, right? Where, people are sending in Linux commands through like a form field or something. And it's like, why in the world is that possible on what should ostensibly be a simple security camera? Right. So it's a good question. We're not going to solve that one here, but I think it's safe to assume that under the hood on a lot of these types of devices, you got a Linux box of some varying capability set. And if those things go end of life and you're still relying on them, people sort of hold out as long as they can. There's not going to be a fix for this stuff. And so I think it's a great conversation to have, not just for IT, IoT, OT, it's system inventory. Do you know that it exists? Do you know what state it's in? And why in the world is it allowed to talk to SQL servers or other things in your house, right? I mean, like, it feels like basic blocking and tackling again, but again, it's hard, especially in big shops where, half the time, I think people probably don't even realize this stuff exists on the network.
No. And especially with like wireless things that are on a passphrase network, all you see is a bunch of random ass MAC addresses. You have no clue what any of it is. You might get a hint as with the vendor OUI, but usually not very much because for those form factors, there's plants that manufacture these things in bulk, and the OUI is tied to the the interface card manufacturer, not the device manufacturer. But there are products and tools out there, varying degrees of expense. Some are, free. You get what you pay for sometimes. But, there are solutions out there, and that this is I've had several calls recently. I do a lot of IoT security stuff, especially on LAN. And the conversation, when we talk through like what this looks like for handling asset inventory and discovery of IoT. And I feel like several times people have said to me, oh, so this is like a whole project. Like this is a whole thing. And I'm like, yeah, you're the tools and the processes we've had for typical enterprise, like fully managed endpoints will not work here.
Right on.
Agreed.
Awesome. Well, we are right at time, so I do appreciate the time today, JJ and Dave. That one went by fast. A lot of good info there, as always. Appreciate it. We will do this again soon, and thanks everyone for attending today.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
All
everyone.
right. Awesome. Take care, guys.
Cheers.